Good afternoon, First Mount Carmel Baptist Church. My name is Jameka Gardner. I am a member here at First Mount Carmel for those of you who are visiting online as well to watch for Bible study. This is my first Bible study ever that I have done, and I will be doing this for the next 3 weeks. So this presentation is by me. The book that I will be presenting from is called The Body Keeps the Score. This book is by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. Alrighty, and so what we'll be studying this tonight is for trauma. And once again, this is the book here that you can find on Amazon, in the bookstore, anywhere. It's about $20, but it's a great book to definitely read. The areas we'll be studying tonight is part 1 and part 2, and that's trauma in the brain. What to look for next week is trauma in children. Tonight is mostly a togetherness of what trauma does to you and to the body. Next week, we will focus in on the children. And so once again, my name is Jameka Gardner. I graduated from Augusta University in May of 2021 with my Master's of Education in Counseling Education with a major in clinical mental health. I'm in my second year of supervision, and what that means is kind of like what the doctor does in residency. I'll complete 3 full years before I can get my official license to become a licensed professional counselor. So after June of 2024, I can apply for that. I'll take a test first and then I'll apply for my licensure, which means that I can just go into my own practice and do therapy. The range of age is from 6 years old to 99, and 99 or older. Right now, I'm in the school-based mental health counselor. I'm a school-based mental health counselor for the Saluda County School District. So what we're going to get into today is trauma. Trauma does not have to come from a combat soldier or a concentration camp victim. Trauma can happen to us, our friends, our families, and our neighbors. Right now, this is from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Research says that 1 in 5 Americans was sexually molested as a child. 1 in 4 was beaten by a parent to the point of a mark being left on their body. And 1 out of 3 couples engages in physical violence, and that's still to this day. So when it comes to therapy, is definitely something I want to talk about first. A lot of people have their assumptions about therapy, whether it's a myth or a fact. And the first thing I tell people, when you're looking for a therapist, research the place in which you want to receive services from. Make an appointment. They'll ask you kind of what are you here for? John, what would you like to be seen for? You'll give a brief description to the intake people in the front. And they'll place you with a counselor so that you can have an assessment or an intake process while making the appointment. But right before, do your research in the building, the licensures that they have. Pay attention to whether or not you want someone who looks like you, who doesn't look like you, who is a male or female, a Christian counselor, a couples counselor, marriage counselor, LGBTQ, all of these different titles. We have different titles as counselors and what we specialize in. For me right now, it's trauma informed therapy, which I love to do. And so you'll see a lot of times when you look up someone or their agency that they work for, you can see exactly what they do. So you'll receive a diagnosis within the first 30 days, and that's for insurance purposes. They won't ask you about, the insurance company wants to know your diagnosis within a 30-day period. The information that you give is what we go based upon a diagnosis. After the assessment, another appointment will be given to you to start your session. Okay, and so in the Body Keeps Score, there's a few different scenarios that are in here that Dr. Bessel looks at And he goes into depth of how PTSD started, and this is around the time when it was just coming out, and they didn't have a name for what was taking place with this Marine soldier, who you will find out in this book if you get this book. But also, I'm going to give you just a brief synopsis of this entire book, and over the course of timing. So this will be this week and next week, and then third and fourth week we'll follow up with grief, and also, well, grief in general, and then some any other questions or comments or concerns. Maybe I can do that on that fifth Wednesday, where you can send me personalized messages, either through Facebook or through email. My email is on the front and as well as the end of the PowerPoint. Observation wise, so Mr. Tom was in the Vietnam War, and so observations, when a client comes in, we begin to observe. Observing takes place with the nonverbal expressions such as your face, the way you walk, the way you move your hands, your legs, you're shaking your leg, you're biting your nails. We see cuts on your skin. We see a burn on your skin. We see bruises. Maybe you come in and you're hungover, so you're walking a little funny. Those are things that we check out in the beginning. And that was the observation. He had on a three-piece suit. He was aggravated. He was drinking. He was hungover, looking at old photos from the 4th of July. So these things are something that we observe ahead of time. Some of his symptoms, he talks about anger in this book, noise that he hears. He has a drinking issue. He talks about nightmares. He talks about no real affection to his wife and children after coming back from war. He talks about stress. He talks about rage. He talks about being numb, having fear and shame. In the DSM, it's the diagnosis is classified as post-traumatic stress disorder, which we know as PTSD. The book definition is a disorder in which a person has difficulty recovering after experiencing or witnessing a terrifying event. Last month or years, it can be 30 days ago, it could be years ago, and with triggers that bring back memories of the trauma, accompanied by intense emotions and physical reactions. And a lot of times these are sweating profusely, waking up in the middle of the night, crying, screaming, any of these things that bring back these intense emotions, being in an accident, and remembering everything that occurred. In this book, you'll definitely see a young lady who was taking her child to school, her 5-year-old daughter, and ended up missing a light. And she talks about the traumatic experience and what happened in that time. And so with Tom, the history of Tom, we know that we looked and we got a few observations from him. We got some symptoms from him. And what we find with Tom in this book is that he reported that when he takes his medication at night, it takes away his nightmares. And of course, you would think that did the job and took away his nightmares, but taking away his nightmares felt as if he was abandoning his friends and their death would be in vain. He needed it to be a living memorial for his friends who had died. And so when we think about that, trauma takes a toll on our brain. And you would think that taking away the nightmares is helping him, but really he felt guilty. I lost my friends and I led them into this place. And as you see the trauma and the loss of self at the bottom, where he loses himself because the trauma came from when he led his squad on a foot patrol, when gunfire starts spewing and killing his friends, his squad, and wounding others in the matter of seconds. After the loss of his former friend in combat, Tom went to neighboring villages right afterwards, and this is within the next day. Neighboring villages, and shot and killed innocent people, innocent farmer. He killed children, and he raped the Vietnamese woman. So we go back to the observation and we go back to symptoms and what was occurring. He came in saying, hey, excuse me, I'm not feeling the affection anymore. I can't love my kids, or I can't love my wife like I need to. He was at a 4th of July event, and the noise of the firecrackers is what gets to him. Um, and it throws him back into a traumatic response. So now that we got a little more information, it shows that he lost himself in this timing. And where did his brain stopped with affection, to be able to love affectionately without being shameful or having guilt when he did these things after his friends died. So now we're getting into the point of what caused where you are now and how you're feeling. So, some areas of focus. The problem is with Tom, and a lot of times when we have gone through something tragic, sometimes we make decisions that are not the best decisions after tragedy, before tragedy, or in between that time. And so one of the hardest things for a traumatized person is confronting their shame about the way they behaved during a traumatic episode. Like he stated, his friends died in front of him, cold blood, and others were wounded. Nothing happened to him. And so in his mind, he's shameful. I was the person who led these people out here, and this is what took place. So instead of him just sobbing in that moment, look at what he's done. He said, I went and I raped a Vietnamese woman. I went and killed a perfectly innocent older farmer and killed some children. So he comes back home, and now he's guilty. Now he's shameful that, oh, wow, I did all of this. And here I am coming back to love my children. And look what I've done. Also haunted by the shame that someone feels about how they did or did not do in certain circumstances, what you should have done. We take time to think afterwards, maybe what I should have done in the traumatic situation, or maybe if I was there, this wouldn't have happened, or maybe if we went a little bit later, it wouldn't have happened. And so these things are going through his mind. Um, and so they despise themselves for how terrified, dependent, excited, or enraged they felt. So in that moment, he felt good. He felt good taking someone else's life because of what had happened to his friends. And so that's what a lot of traumatized people stay stuck on, as the part of being shamed. Um, and so even with that, just a little snippet of victims of child abuse is something that they compared it to as a problem. And it says most of them suffering from agonizing shame about the actions they took to survive and maintain a connection with who abused them. And that's definitely a concept to understand, a hard concept. Um, the things you had to do to survive. It wasn't thriving, whether it was a relationship, whether it was being molested, whether it was being raped at a young age, the things you had to do to survive. And these could have been a parent. This could have been somebody close to you. This could have been a friend of a friend. But what you had to do in order to maintain that connection of the person that you were being abused from. It says this is particularly true if the abuser was someone close to the child, someone the child depended on. And it's as and often in this case, someone in this book, you'll also see where someone was being abused sexually, and you seem to do whatever you need to do to survive, but then later on you feel shameful at what you had to do, or whether you were happy about doing something in that moment when things happen later on. It says the results can be confusing about whether one was a victim or a willing participant. So then you start wondering to yourself, even though I was surviving and it seems as if I willingly did it when I wasn't really trying to participate. And so a lot of times our mind is flip-flopping with those things, as to whether did I really take the time, was it really just that person, or did I allow this person to do something, and which leads to bewilderment. And that's a difference between love and terror and pain and pleasure. So this is the how, the why, and what's next. In this book, Tom um, receives the psychological testing in which the subject's perception of ink blots. So with this activity or this test, you look at ink blocks as they're labeled. They have nothing, and you have to tell what you're perceiving of that ink block. So it's no right or wrong answer. But it helps us to understand what your mind is thinking in that moment of a traumatized victim. And it comes with the psychological interpretations. And what we do is we look at those and we say, hey, well, a traumatized child would probably tell you that this was somebody beating them, and someone who had never been traumatized or someone who had a loving family could tell you it was a bunny painting, or either it's a puppy playing with the ball. But another child would tell you that's a dark space, and this ink blot is scary to them. And this is what helps us to understand what someone has actually gone through. It says when someone has experienced trauma, they have trouble deciphering whether whatever is going on around them. So trauma affects the imagination. And when you have a traumatized person, or you run into people who may have not worked through their traumas, we think of them as always negative, or always this, and in their minds their imagination is gone, and they have not worked through this trauma that they have experienced. So it says being pulled back into the past where deep emotions or intense emotions were present, one will suffer failure of imagination and loss of mental flexibility. So you lose that part of you that says, let's imagine this occurred, or like little kids who want to talk about a book, or imaginations, or rainbows, unicorns, all these kind of things. Your mind will not perceive the things that once made you happy when a traumatic response has taken place and you've not worked through it. It says, without imagination, there is no hope, there's no chance to envision a better future, no place to go, no goal to reach. For real change to take place, the body needs to learn that the danger has passed and to live in the reality of the present, which is sometimes hard. Our search to understand trauma has led us to think differently, not only about the structure of the mind, but also about the process by which it heals. And so what we do sometimes to get you back in the here and now is to feel your hands. You know that your hands are here. You're not driving that car. You're not being abused. You're not trying to fight somebody off of you. Feel your behind sitting in a chair. You feel your legs as they are sitting and the rest of your leg is down. Feel your feet on the ground. So sometimes we would tell you to take your shoes off, sandals or whatnot, even just with your feet, and press your feet down on the ground as we talk about these things, so that this trauma response won't come back to you as if you're reliving it. But hey, I'm here in this spot now, and let's live in the present while I speak. Definitely take some time. It's definitely in trauma-informed therapy where we do have to take time to get to that point. But a lot of times we have to go back and we have to talk about it in order to get over it. And that's the hardest part. It's like you've already had the wound, but we have to go back and peel it off and get down in there and then sew it back up. And that's where your real healing comes from, is after. Why stay stuck? We know that a lot of domestic violence cases, a lot of times the women go back or the men go back. And yes, men can be abused as well. We don't see it as often, but they can. And it says many traumatized people give up. And so rather than risking the experience of new opportunities, new options, they stay stuck in fear of what they know. A lot of times as people, we are afraid of the unknown. And so risks are not taken. And so a person who's traumatized knows that if I do this, this person's going to do this. So in a domestic violence case, I know that my boyfriend or husband is going to hit me if I do this. I'd rather deal with that than dealing with someone else who may burn me, or someone who may push me down, or somebody who may do this. And a lot of times you'll see that mentality in certain people where they stay in certain things and you're wondering, why not save yourself? And it's not that they can't say in that moment, they can't save themselves. Their mind is in a zone where it's frozen. So like the freeze and well, the flight, freeze, stop, all of those things, your brain will sometimes freeze. And this is what happens with traumatized people. Instead of risking it to take up a new opportunity to see where it may go, you'll stay stuck in that relationship or whatever that is, that the outcome of it. So it says scared animals return home, regardless of whether the home is safe or frightening, seeking shelter and familiarity. And so yes, so when it was a study done where the chicken was plucked, feathers plucked all out of it. And the guy still gave him food. And the chicken came back to the food because he knew this is the person that's supposed to love me. This is the person who cares for me. So I have to go back to eat from him. But you would wonder, as your person, as you being the person that you are, why would somebody go back to that? It's because I know I don't want to risk learning someone else, or I don't want to risk another opportunity. And this is what happened. So something that becomes familiar to you is the trauma that is faced, especially when it comes to children and those who have been um, mentally, sexually abused. You think about it, some of those people stay stuck to that person who sexually abused them. And we go back to, once again, the risk of taking to do that with someone else. It's like, no, I don't want that. But this person was supposed to love me. This person was supposed to be here for me. And a lot of times we have a lot of traumatized children who will take up for that person as well. When we do like forensic interviewing, and that's when we bring in a child and interview them of what happened. And they basically showed the therapist what happened to them in that moment. We kind of do some play therapy, which is kind of like playing with dolls and or drawing, and they'll show us what happened in those moments. Depersonalization. At some point in time during a traumatic incident, it'll occur with a blank stare, and it says absent mind and an outward manifestation of biological freeze reaction. And what that is in this book you'll read of a lady and her husband also, who was in a car accident of a pileup of like 80 something cars, and they watched as a lady hanging from the top of where their car was burned to death. And the husband relived all of it in that moment, and he said he looks over at his wife and she's kind of just frozen. Depersonalization is when something occurs, and instead of you being there, you're there physically, but it seems as though you're watching yourself. That is definitely something that happens mentally, and that's not that you're crazy, but it does happen. A lot of times our brain can't take too much of what trauma is, and so it stashes it somewhere else. And so a lot of times we disassociate, created by trauma. We disassociate. So it showed with his wife that when she was younger, she had a mother who would yell and scream. And in those moments, she would just take within herself and just go to another place. Well, in that moment, disassociation is what she did in this wreck. So she was frozen in a time where what she would do when she needed to be calm or when she felt safe, and herself and her safety was inside of her, not knowing that the outside world was going off in front of her. The outside world was burning. She didn't see those things because in her mind, she went to her safe space, which is definitely one of the hardest things to do with a person who's experiencing trauma. Because in that moment, they don't experience what that trauma felt like, and they may not remember all those things that her husband remembered in that time. But he's the one who was able to help her get out of the situation, because she would have died herself, not knowing, paying attention to what had just happened. And it's the survival mode. So it's the disappearance of self. You become in survival mode where this is my safe space and not going anywhere. Some people go into a corner and they remember themselves as a little kid balled up in a corner, and that's how you were able to survive and get over seeing your parents fight, or seeing people fight in front of you, or someone arguing, or a violent situation where it took place in a neighborhood or gang violence, and you're able to just take in within yourself and just go off into a stare, which is not a good thing. And they tell you that because it is harder to help a traumatized patient who has disassociated from the world itself. Lastly, it says desensitization, and the result of re-experiencing is definitely hard. And so when you see people coming from the military, they will tell you that they had to go to desensitization when they come back from overseas, and they go back through these things such as the shootings and the noises that you hear, so that they can get them back to the civilian world of hearing things and not automatically reacting. And that happens definitely with anybody coming from overseas or just from the military in general. And you'll hear them saying they had to go through desensitization training, and we actually do that as well. So what happens to the body in this book? So this is around chapter 5 and 6, and I did not put a lot of 5 and 6 in here because it's a lot of information. It's very informational, so it's not as it is not perceived as something simple. It's just, it looks like a whole bunch of information, but definitely it shows you brain scans. It shows you what happened in the reaction of someone losing a loved one, 9/11, and what a child drew. It talks about the brain and the different parts of your brain that occurs when trauma is there, such as the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, yeah, and then the lateral nucleus of the thalamus. You have different things in here that they show you of what happens in the brain as it shuts down, and where depersonalization, which is the splitting from yourself, occurs as well. And they also call certain places in your, so like your brain, the smoke detector that goes on overdrive. And this is just a book that you can definitely look through, especially if you're in the counseling field, not even just the counseling field, but the teachers as well, educators, anybody who educate or want to know about anything holistic wise. I'm one of those who don't encourage medications. I encourage you doing things that help with the body, mind, and soul first. And then if you need additional help, of course, take the medication. But I don't throw medication first, especially to the children. Our brains continue to work until the age of 25 is when it stops growing and maturing. And so kind of putting on medication ahead of time, to me, the chemicals in your brain are not all the way there until you're 25 years old. So it messes up a lot. And you can definitely read up upon that too, about medication in children. But back to what happens to the body. After trauma, the world is experienced differently through our nervous system. The survivor's energy becomes focused on suppressing the inner chaos. So when something has happened to us, the body, the same emotions and the things that you went through, and those, so that feeling of your heart racing or your hands getting sweaty, all those things come back to us. And a lot of times we become so focused on trying to calm that down. And so trying to control these effects lead to psychological reactions that can result in physical symptoms, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and autoimmune diseases. And this is why it's essential for treating the body, the mind, and the brain. Or the body, mind, and soul. And we say mind because yes, you have a brain. Yes, you have a brain, but your mind is something a little bit different. Is what you're thinking. So yes, we talk about the soul, we talk about the body in itself, and it says the brain, the mind, and the body, and the healing of trauma is what the other part of it is. Because if you can say, yes, I'm going to help heal you in your mind and in your brain by medication, but your body also feels. And when you have been traumatized, whether it's a child, whether it's a situation that occurred later on in life, you have to get back in sync with your body. Your body is definitely something that's going to tell you whether anything is wrong. And so all these autoimmune diseases do come from trauma. A lot of times it's what we do to our bodies and not thinking that we're not stressing, but really we are. And our body does take a toll. It says trauma can cause us not to feel deeply, leaving it impossible for us to truly feel fully alive. And as you think about Tom didn't feel alive anymore. Look what he had done. He felt shameful. How can I go to my wife and I just did this to another woman? How can I go back to my children and I killed innocent children? The first step of recovery is sensing, naming, and identifying what is going on in my body. Sensing it, knowing, hey, this is it, naming it, whether it's, yep, you know what, I have chills, that's anxiety, I know where it's coming from, and then identifying what is going on in my body. So, oh, my blood pressure is elevating, my sugar levels dropping. Any of those things is definitely connecting to your body. Visiting the past in therapy should be done while people are biologically speaking, firmly rooted in the present and feeling as calm, safe, and grounded as possible. So, earlier when I said when you feel that you are in a situation, they try to make sure that you feel comfortable. And when you feel comfortable, you're sitting right up in a chair, and we tell you, to feel here so you can feel your hair and how your hair feels today. Touch your face. We're here in this moment. You're not in the automobile, you're not in the place where someone's beating you, but you're thinking about your traumas. And we want to make sure that you're here in the here and now. You touch yourself, you touch all the way down, you touch your legs to feel them in on your seat. Your behind is on the seat as well. You tap your feet so that you can feel that your feet are at the bottom of the ground as well. It says being anchored in the present while revisiting your trauma opens the possibility of deeply knowing that the terrible event belongs to the past, so that we won't keep reliving it in the future, but saying, hey, you know what? This happened and this is what I need to deal with. So, kind of like if you can't change something, how do I deal with it? And this is how you deal and cope. So the next parts that's coming up is part 3, 4, and 5, and that's next Wednesday, February 8th at 12 noon and 7 p.m. And we're here virtually at the First Mount Carmel Baptist Church Facebook page or church website. I am grateful for this opportunity. Yes, definitely nervous in the beginning. I probably recorded myself 4 or 5 times trying to get right for tonight. But I thank you for watching. I hope that you come back next week to definitely talk about trauma and children, and then to finish off with grief in the next 2 Wednesdays that we'll talk about grief and other different things that we do when it comes to therapy. I hope that it allows you to feel a little more comfortable about therapy, and to know that it is normal for us to do, especially in this day and time, but definitely our race of people. I don't see a lot of people of the Black and brown community getting help, and it's okay to get help. At one point in time, I know a lot of people growing up would say, your parent would say, hey, well, let's go to church, but we can't fault our grandparents for that because that's all they knew. And God is definitely all. And so a lot of times when we discuss to people my age, and older, we always talk about, it's a good thing that it's becoming the new norm to definitely go seek counseling when you're feeling a certain type of way. If you're suicidal, definitely, get some help. And anytime I'm free. So I'm free in the times the afternoon most of the time, where you can email me if you want to ask Reverend Perry to give me a note that says, hey, I want to know more about this. I don't mind doing those things. Definitely if we need another Wednesday where we talk about just all the questions that might have been asked, whether through Facebook or through the church or through my email. My email is jameka.gardner7@yahoo.com. Sending me a message. All of this will be private and confidential. So that when I do answer the questions, especially if I answer it online here, I won't say a name or anything of that. It'll be anonymous. And so just to ask certain questions, I know some people may have, hey, well, what happens when this happens? Or, what do you think about therapy? And therapy was definitely something that I wasn't up to until I figured out this was my purpose in life. And when God showed me what I needed to be doing, I had to go and get therapy as well in order to be a therapist. And it was the best thing I had ever done. Things that I had, had going on in my past and traumas that I had faced, it was amazing to go to counseling and be able to talk about those things, but to also get to know a little bit more about myself. And the best thing that you could ever do for yourself is to know who you are, body, mind, and soul. Thank you again, and hope to see you all next Wednesday.